It is our honor and our pleasure on behalf of This World, the Jewish Values Network, and the Bronfman Center for Jewish Life at NYU, my colleague Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, and other sponsoring organizations to welcome the two most important names in the entire world relating to genocide. My very dear friend of a quarter of a century, Professor Elie Wiesel, who I affectionately call Reb Eliezer, who on any list would be included as one of the three most respected men alive. And Professor Wiesel, thank you so much for being with us today. Professor Wiesel is the living embodiment of the 6 million martyred Jews of the Holocaust, our people who were slaughtered so brutally under the Nazi regime of the Second World War. And then standing to my left, I'm going to actually make it to my right, the other name who is most respected with regards to world genocide, the man who actually stopped the Rwandan genocide in 1994, the military genius who put an end to the slaughter of his people, the fastest genocide in world history, 330 dying every single hour, the president of Rwanda, head of state, here for UN Week. What a great honor for us to host him here, President Paul Kagame. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Michael Fromm.
Thank you, Shmuley. I just want to tell you that I'm delighted to welcome our loyal supporters, our invited guests, and our esteemed panelists to what I know will prove to be a very important and timely discussion on the responsibility of the strong to protect the weak. I can't think of a more essential Jewish value than man looking out for his fellow man, which is why, despite the timing of the holidays, Shmuley and our board felt that it was crucial to take advantage of UN Week to hold this event. Our organization is dedicated to the dissemination of Jewish values through the mainstream media, as well as public lectures, debates, and panel discussions, and not to mention the numerous books that Rabbi Shmuley has written on this subject. It's been my privilege to be part of such a righteous cause. I know my fellow board members join me in thanking Michael Steinhardt and Sheldon Adelson, our sponsors for this evening's program, along with David Sterling and Ken Abramowitz, our reception hosts, for their unwavering belief in our mission. I also want to pay special tribute to Professor Wiesel and President Kagame of Rwanda for honoring us with their presence. Thank you. On behalf of the Jewish Values Network, thank you for supporting this great organization and allowing us to continue our important work. And now it's my pleasure to introduce David Sterling.
I just want to thank Mike Fromm for doing what you're doing to keep this organization running the way it is, and my good friend Rabbi Shmuley, who we all agree is so special. I just want to thank you for coming, and I just want to recognize something I read recently. You know, the famous American author Mark Twain was a pessimist, and he wrote that it's not worthwhile to try to prevent history from repeating itself, because the character of man is such that doing so would be impossible. But Rabbi Shmuley, I know Mike Fromm, I know I am. From what I've read, President Kagame is, I know Elie Wiesel is. We're optimists. And what we're doing here tonight and having this discussion is going to go a long way to trying to prevent history from repeating itself. That cause to which we've all dedicated ourselves in these kind of affairs. So thank you for coming. Really appreciate it, and enjoy.
I'm glad to be here with the Wiesels and with the Adelsons, and I hope we have a exciting and perhaps even feisty discussion, which I'm sure you certainly will like and fully participate in. So, thank you, Shmuley.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Thank you. He has brought his country back from the brink. This is a country that 19 and a half years ago, and the 6th of April will be the 20th anniversary of the beginning of the genocide, 800,000 people were hacked to death. Today, the president has one of the fastest growing economies of any country in the world. He masterminded the takeovers of his country in '94 to stop the genocide. And if you go to Rwanda, you will see the reconciliation that has taken place between the ethnic groups.
thank you, Rabbi Shumri, and those he worked with to avail me and my delegation and Rwanda, so to speak, this platform to meet the great men and women who have already been introduced as we are going along, and also to share with them our own experiences in our history, in our lives, that mirror the lives of many in this room, as you rightly said, and the histories of the two countries where people come from, whether they are Jews or people from Rwanda who were also persecuted in the same way. So I just wanted to thank you for introducing us to these great men and women with a lot they have done in their lives for humanity, and in particular to address some of these challenges different peoples of this world face in terms of persecution or other similar problems. I wanted to most sincerely thank you. And I'm saying this with a sense and understanding that one of the things that lack when things begin to get wrong is that kind of place where to voice, to express, to talk about the real things that concern people. So today is an opportunity where we can speak out and share our own experiences and also benefit from the experiences and the wisdom of others who even have probably gone through more complicated or complex experiences than our own. So I'm just here to express those thanks and to bring our own solidarity from Rwanda to share the concerns, the interests that many people in this room have. So I'm very grateful and I'm thankful that I could.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, let me just say that the President of Rwanda is a phenomenal friend of the Jewish people and the State of Israel. Rwanda announced at a press conference that we actually put on with Minister Louise Mushikiwabo, who I think is here somewhere, the outstanding and very eloquent Foreign Minister of Rwanda, who is now trapped outside of our own reception, that Rwanda will shortly be opening an embassy in Israel, God willing. The President has just made his second trip to Israel, I believe. He was President Shimon Peres's personal guest at his 90th birthday celebrations. He sat right next to Barbara Streisand at those, I hope she sang for you, Mr. President, and brought that legendary voice to your ears. And the President has a unique place in his heart for the Jewish people, and we reciprocate. And we thank you very much for your friendship, Mr. President, especially given that Rwanda currently has the Africa seat on the Security Council at the United Nations, that the friendship of your country to the Jewish state is so greatly appreciated.
The world committed itself to preventing genocide wherever and whenever it may occur. And yet it did happen, again and again and again. Just 30 years later, Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge slaughtered 1/3 of the Cambodian population in killing fields that claimed the lives of an estimated 2.5 million people. 20 years after that, the world watched and did absolutely nothing, as nearly 1 million Tutsis in Rwanda were slaughtered by Hutus in the fastest genocide in world history, with about 300 dying every hour for 3 months. It took a leader of military genius, who we are fortunate to have here on the stage tonight, named Paul Kagame, to finally decide that since the world would not come to the rescue of his people, he must put an end to the slaughter himself. 3 months, his RPF forces conquered the entire country of Rwanda and ended the genocide. And yet mass killings continued in the former Yugoslavia, in Bosnia, in Kosovo, with NATO finally deciding to launch a bombing campaign that would end the slaughter. And still more than 1 million have been lost in the Sudan and Darfur, with the world doing little to end the killing. It is to the memory of the millions whose lives have been taken in genocides that this evening is dedicated. On behalf of my wife Miriam and my dear friend and partner in Birthright Israel, Michael Steinhardt, it is my pleasure to welcome you all tonight to this important discussion about genocide. The responsibility of the strong to protect the weak. One of the greatest and arguably the greatest humanitarian of our time, and is the very face of world Holocaust consciousness. The second, President Paul Kagame of Rwanda, the only man on earth who can claim to have stopped a genocide. I will now introduce the moderator of tonight's discussion, our dear friend and my and Mary's partner in so many global events to benefit the Jewish people, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach. He's the founder and executive director of This World, the Jewish Values Network, who put this evening together and whose recent trip to Rwanda to organize tonight's event, Mary and I were honored and proud to sponsor. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to please welcome America's Rabbi Shmuley Boteach.
This is a historic evening. It has long been my desire, as someone who believes that combating genocide is the foremost humanitarian obligation of our time. Whether you are religious or an atheist, and on this stage I debated Christopher Hitchens, at the time the world's most famous atheist, but the one thing that he and I agreed on is that ensuring that the words never again mean just that, never again. That no child will ever die because of race or creed. That no man or woman will ever die because of religion or race. That human life should be of infinite value, and that we are sick and tired of a world that turns a blind eye to the mass slaughter of innocents because of the color of their skin, or because of their religious identity, or because of their spiritual beliefs. That this must finally stop. Rabbi Eliezer, yesterday in the Torah, we read about the horrible story of Cain and Abel. 2 brothers, and yet Cain is jealous of Abel. He turns against him and he murders him. And immediately God turns to him and he says to him that the blood of your brother cries out to me from the earth that has absorbed it. Likewise, the Jewish Torah is unique in saying, Leviticus chapter 19, Lo sa'amod al dam re'echo, that you cannot stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. It's a little bit different to how the New Testament might say that we maybe should turn the other cheek, sometimes have to love our enemies. I have told my Christian friends that I'm not sure Jesus meant necessarily when it came to something like genocide, we should turn the other cheek. I think he probably meant in the face of petty slights, etc. So I have to put it to you, the question that is at the very center of tonight's discussion. Do the strong nations of this world have a responsibility to expend treasure and even blood to protect the weak?
One of the saddest stories in the Bible is really the story of Cain and Abel. And I wish we had more time. I would give you a lecture on it. That's one of my favorite things that I do, give lectures on the Bible. After all, the text is so beautiful, so despairing. and so meaningful. There were only two brothers in the whole world, two brothers, Cain and Abel. And one became the assassin or the victim of the other. Why? Why does the Bible begin its career with this story? It was troubling me for many, many, many years. I studied every single source. And then I came to the conclusion, actually, well, first of all, as you know, I love questions more than answers, but this question has to be at least addressed. Is it that all of us must learn that whatever happens, happens to us as well? Which means Cain and Abel were brothers. Whose brother am I? And that's my choice. I can say that Cain, because he was human, it was a human act. Therefore, he is my brother. Or I can say, oh, no, he's not my brother, he's my enemy. Abel is my brother. And so, what have you learned from modern history? We have learned really that it's possible for people who think that they are brothers and one becomes the enemy of the other. You know, I did not go to Rwanda for all kinds of reasons, but I did go years ago to Yugoslavia. At that time, that was in the news. Yugoslavia, where hundreds and hundreds of people killed one another every single day. And I would go there. I went literally from person to person, asking, why? Tell me why. Because in Yugoslavia, it was not strangers who were enemies, but people who knew one another, neighbors, sometimes cousins. I said, why do you do that? And I never have the answer. Usually they began and stopped in the middle of the sentence. To this day, I don't know what they would have said, but I saw them. And I remember if ever I had tears in my sleep, it was there, in Yugoslavia. But day after day, I saw them. And says, therefore, when you say, one of the most beautiful sentences in the world, naturally, thou shalt not stand idly by. What are we doing as teachers, as writers, as humanists? Simply, we are not standing idly by. And the word idly is very powerful. Idly, don't stand idly by. Which means if you are there and something is happening, do something. Become a participant. Unfortunately, I belong to a generation that has seen the opposite. When we study our contemporary history books, what hurts is not so much, of course, that hurts more than anything in the world, the elements of the tragedy, but the indifference of the world. And we were convinced, I remember, in Auschwitz, as I was walking with my father, night of our arrival, I remember we spoke, and I was convinced that all that was secret, behind and beyond mountains and walls, secret, that the world wouldn't accept it, would do something. Only afterwards, when I came to America and went to the libraries, the archives, and I realized that everything was known, that's when I got desperate. I felt Roosevelt, the great Roosevelt, the friend of the Jewish people, surely he doesn't know. Now we know, everybody knew except the victims. And therefore, since then, because of those memories, whenever something happens in the world, which means when collectively or individually, people suffer or die, I feel it's our duty at least to raise our voice.
Professor Wiesel, you were saying that how surprised you were that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was beloved by the Jews, and who the Jews voted for, I'm just guessing, 90% of the time. And he ultimately did defeat the Nazis, but he failed, it seems, bombing the tracks to Auschwitz, The quota for German Jews at the time to enter the United States was 26,000 a year. Only 1/4 of that quota was filled. Troop transports came back from Europe completely empty. They could have brought Jewish refugees. The St. Louis was turned away in 1939 from Cuba, but then it wasn't allowed to land in the United States. So are you saying that he failed to use his strength to protect the weak?
Roosevelt was our hero. In my town, I didn't know the name of David Ben-Gurion. I didn't. I was a yeshiva bocher. I studied in the yeshiva, studying only Talmud, nothing else in the Bible. I didn't read newspapers. I didn't know. It's only when I came after war when I realized who Ben-Gurion was. I didn't know the name, but I did know one thing, that Roosevelt is a friend of the Jewish people. And therefore we felt if all that would be true, he would know. And if he knows, he would do something. And only later when I came to America and began going to libraries and studied, and he knew, Roosevelt knew. Look, he was a great man, a great leader. What he has done for America in those times will not be forgotten, of course not. But when it comes to Jewish suffering, to the Jewish tragedy, he did not win the test.
So as a war leader defeating the Nazis, he succeeded, but as someone who could have stopped a genocide, he failed.
Maybe not stop, but at least limited it.
Limited.
And at least spoken about it.
He never, in I think it was 900 press conferences during the war, he never once mentioned the slaughter of the Jews of Europe.
The Jewish tragedy was not mentioned. He mentioned the tragedies of victims, yes, but not mainly about the Jewish tragedy, he did not.
Sheldon Adelson asked me today, Shmuley, why as a Jew are you so interested in the Rwandan genocide? And I said, because Sheldon, we Jews are the ones who proclaim to the world never again. We taught the world, thou shalt not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. It's on our Bible. We gave the world the 10 Commandments, do not murder, and it has to apply to everybody, Jew and non-Jew alike. But in no genocide, with what Professor Wiesel said about what FDR did not do to save the Jews of Europe, although he did, thank God, stop the Nazis and that ultimately saved them, but that was so much more true of the slaughter of the Tutsis in Rwanda. The United States had just been spooked by Black Hawk Down, Somalia, in late 1993. They weren't going to do anything for Rwanda. And the history is terrible. It's almost shameful for this great nation that I love and of which I am a very proud citizen. President Clinton did not meet with his senior staff even once during the Rwandan genocide. He apologized for that when he came to your country in 1998. Susan Rice, our current national security advisor, actually said in a meeting that if they call the genocide a genocide, it'll affect Democrats in the congressional 1994 elections. That was written by Samantha Power, very dear friend, great woman, one of the foremost champions of fighting genocide, and she wrote that in her book, A Problem from Hell, and now Susan Rice is her colleague. I'm not trying to make anyone look bad, I'm just retelling the facts. The United States was asked to jam the RTLM antenna from which the genocide was being broadcast. Even to jam the antenna, you had advocates in the State Department saying that we can't mess with the Hutus' right to freedom of speech. When that freedom of speech was calling Tutsis cockroaches that had to be exterminated. So the question tonight is, do the strong have an obligation to protect the weak? And do you feel that obligation was met during the Rwandan genocide? And what should have been done?
Thank you. Many things were happening and were not happening at the same time. Others were not happening. But the genocide of 1994 has a history. It's not just that it erupted and happened. In fact, if you look just decades back, in, say, 1930s, we had on the hands of the Belgians, who were the colonial masters at the time, the population of Rwanda profiled and differentiated and taught to believe that they were different from each other, and on the same basis, they should hate each other. That's how identity cards were issued that would show that one is a Hutu, another is a Tutsi, another is a Twa. In a community that is otherwise brought together by one culture, one language, the Rwandese culture. So there's that bit of history. So when it happened in 1994 and there was that slaughter going on, and we had that history brought out and explained and shown how that would result into people actually not only hating each other as they were taught, but to kill as we had in the form of genocide in 1994. So it was surprising that at that time it happened, the response, in fact, we used to have many telephone calls made to us from outside, from the countries, developed countries. The message was, try to restrain. That was to us, we who were trying to fight the genocide. And the question back to them was always, what do you mean? How? And the whole thing had been characterized as, this is the usual, the common savage reaction by Africans, killing one another. This is something we are used to. So it wasn't seen for what it was, a genocide of people killed for who they were, persecuted. No, it was right from the UN, including now the very people who had actually been associated with the history of profiling people to that extent. That it was just slaughter of one ethnic group by another, that would play out and that would be fine. But in actual fact, when you get to know the details, it was far worse than they were trying to put it. Like has been said already, the killings were not just along the ethnic lines, they just what they called one ethnic group killing the other. Imagine in Rwanda we had, even along these lines, intermarriages. And we had people separating their own children in one family and some being killed because they looked like the group that was being persecuted, and the others left by the parents. So the level of hatred had been pushed to a very high level to the extent that it really came out as insanity of some kind that people could do this. But then, from outside, when there was this kind of response of indifference, of saying, well, this is how it plays out in Africa with Africans, it's just one, some would call them tribes, others ethnic groups, and it's like, well, we can have one kill the other, and it usually happens, and it would play out, and we would move on. But of course, we ourselves, the Rwandans, and especially those at the receiving end, could not see it that way and could not accept it that way.
Well, the Rwandan genocide was different to the Holocaust in that, as Professor Wiesel just said, they wanted to deny that the slaughter of European Jewry was happening insofar as there weren't cameras, television crews filming it. Rwanda, all of that existed, even though there were only 15 journalists, because it wasn't an important story to them, but we did know what was happening. The UN pulled out its troops based, again, unfortunately, with the United States taking the lead and Kofi Annan not giving Romeo Dallaire any permission to stop the genocide, which he had requested to use his Belgian troops. Are you And now President Clinton, who oversaw this, is a close friend of yours. He made an apology. It took a lot of guts for a world leader to make an apology. He puts a lot of time in the Clinton Global Initiative to humanitarian work in Rwanda. He was there the day before I visited you in Kigali recently. Are you angry at the United States? Were you angry at the time? Did you say to yourself, this is a superpower that believes in freedom, democracy? Did you think we were hypocrites at the time? That the United States was taking the lead at removing the UN mission? That the Clinton administration at the time would not even block the RTLM transmissions, and that we wouldn't even give African nations who wanted to go in and stop the genocide armored personnel carriers? We made them pay for them while they sat for a month in these negotiations. I mean, this is kind of hard to believe. Are you angry at the United States? Were you angry at the time? Were you angry at the world community for seeing your people slaughtered and doing nothing?
Issues of hypocrisy have been, relating to hypocrisy have been abandoned before even the genocide happened, and more significant during the genocide. But one lesson we learned along the way was not to dwell so much on blaming others for what has happened or what has not happened, but to take responsibility for ourselves. Because indeed, understanding this world so we were so much angry at what was happening to us, irrespective of where they were or where that was coming from, and we focused our minds on saying, let's deal with the problem. Because if we had wasted time thinking about others, what they are able to do for us or what they are not able to do for us, we probably would not have even been able to bring that to an end, or we would have had double loss of what we actually did.
Well, Eliezer, one of the things that I want to talk to you about, given the time this evening, is one of the disagreements, the only disagreement that you and I have ever had, and who has the chutzpah to disagree with Elie Wiesel. But you don't believe that we should hate evil, and I think we should hate evil, the evil people, because we won't fight them otherwise. I'll get to that in just a moment. But, okay, so I think we heard from President Kagame and Professor Wiesel that the strong do have an obligation to protect the weak. Mr. President, you've expressed your cynicism that they could be relied upon, and you think that people have to be much more independent in protecting themselves, and that's the posture you've adopted as the leader of your country. And Eliezer, you also agree that the strong have an obligation to protect the weak, and you're kind of disappointed that even some of the great leaders, and you're praising Roosevelt, but amidst that, you're very disappointed at what he did not do, even a great man like him who cared. Let's bring it to the current situation. And I'm going to turn to you again, Rebbe Eliezer, for a moment. In 2010, President Obama was putting a lot of pressure on Israel about settlements in Jerusalem. You took out full-page ads in the world's leading publications, and you said that Jerusalem appears 600 odd times in the Hebrew Bible. It doesn't appear in the Quran, and the president should understand our attachment to Jerusalem. And the president invited you to lunch. He's a dear friend of yours, President Obama. He has great respect for you, and I believe it's reciprocal. Will you, since the strong have an obligation to protect the weak, are you now going to speak out, let's say, about Iran and the president's overtures to Iran, that they have yet to call back their annihilatory, genocidal rhetoric against Israel? I know it was Ahmadinejad, and this is a new president, but he has yet to renounce it and say that's a bunch of claptrap, and he has yet to renounce the funding of Hamas and Hezbollah. And given that you're one of the most authoritative moral voices in the entire world, and those ads may have changed President Obama's posture towards Jerusalem. He invited you to lunch, and then it changed. That's the authority you carry. Will you be saying something about Iran now that an Israeli prime minister is arriving tomorrow with the threat of genocide still against Israel from Iran, without that being removed? And again, now Prime Minister Netanyahu arrives. He's on the defensive yet again. The New York Times today, front page, is about how Netanyahu can be seen as a warmonger if he doesn't get with the new approach that people want peace and they want to see reconciliation. What is your attitude about the overture to Iran amidst this genocidal rhetoric toward Israel?
I'm against it, naturally. Of course. But look, I speak to people, I speak to leaders all over the world, and about Iran, I have done a lot. I cannot tell you what, because it's always personal, but I have done a lot. I believe Iran is a danger. Not only because Iran has, I don't even know why, become the enemy of Israel. I don't know why. Maybe they don't know why. They needed an enemy, and they chose Israel. But they are an enemy, no doubt. And I spoke to many leaders of the world of that. And you can imagine what I said. The problem is, look, in this world, two categories of people have power: politics or finances. I'm not involved in politics, and I'm very poor in finances. So therefore, if they listen because I spoke and I speak, it's because it's not nice not to listen to me. So they listen to me. But I know very well, the moment I leave them, they go on to the next item. And therefore, I need a lot not to become cynical. I need a lot of work on myself not to become cynical. Because it's so easy. It's not nice not to take a telephone call from me. It's not nice something. But I know very well that my influence is so weak, my impact is almost non-existent.
I saw the change in policy after the full-page ads you took out in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, countless other publications. So let me just put it straight to you, if you don't mind, Rabbi Eliezer, because of the gravity, the enormity of the question. Do you believe that the United States should be negotiating with Iran before they renounce those genocidal aspirations? Officially renounce them and say that is not the policy of this government. It has no desire to destroy the state of Israel.
Absolutely. I think America should adopt a very harsher line, more truthful line, and say to Iran, look, you cannot continue like that. Not with our consent. You cannot. But maybe they do that. I hope they do. We don't know it, but they do.
We're debating this question about Syria because 1,500 children were gassed, 100,000 people were killed. And I know that you have a close relationship with President Obama, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot about this, but again, if it's not people like you and Professor Wiesel who speak out about the slaughter of innocents, what do we do about something like Syria, where poison gas is used? Is that a trigger for genocide? RTLM was broadcasting this cockroach stuff day in and day out, and it was a trigger for genocide. And then suddenly all they needed was one trigger, the assassination of President Habyarimana, and suddenly a genocide begins. And most accounts, of course, are that he was shot down by his own people in order to trigger that genocide. By Hutu extremists who rejected the Hutu moderates. So, are you concerned about the use of poison gas in Syria? Do you feel the obligation as a world leader to speak out and say something? Because what confuses me, and I'm not trying to even be objective here, because I don't feel when it comes to genocide one can be, or mass murder, one can be objective. We had this terrible shooting in Newtown, Connecticut in December, where 20 children, 6 teachers were murdered by Adam Lanza. He then shot himself. Had he said, okay, I surrender to the police and I'll give up my arsenal, he still would be punished. Even if you give up your chemical weapons, you still can't kill children. What is your opinion as someone who stopped the genocide as to what should happen in Syria?
These situations are very complex. Some things are not very clear or straightforward as heard or seen on the surface of it. But one thing is very clear. Poison gas should not be used anywhere against anybody. I wish we didn't even have them in stock anywhere in this world. That's
I got to clap for that.
But you have to deal with the world that we have and things that are there. In the case, say, of Syria, or even in many other cases, there are two things maybe one needs to look at, whether they happen at the same time, but it's one that has to happen. If a genocide is taking place, or killings are taking place anywhere, even before you really understand or get to the bottom of why the killings are happening, you quickly think about how how do we stop the killings? Because that's what is immediate. You've got to stop the loss of lives. As you do that, or even after doing that, if it is possible, then you can go into these details that will lead you to understanding other things that could be done, or the actual basis why the killings were taking place and why this was. Because if you wait to first understand why the killings are going on and let the killings go on, by the time you get to understand why the killings are going on, maybe you will have life already.
So isn't it important to punish someone who does those killings? I know that American public opinion...
Absolutely. There has to be a level of accountability. In fact, a very strong level of accountability. But you have to be clear about who is doing that.
Mr. President, I sometimes feel that the Rwandans are the Jews of Africa. There are so many similarities, some of them very unfortunate, between your people and the Jewish people. First and foremost, the fact that you experienced a genocide, of course. Second, that the UN seems very unfairly critical of your country, which is par for the course for the state of Israel. Many of us in the Jewish community don't have a lot of respect for the UN. It's humanitarian work, of course. It's outstanding, and I've seen it around the world. But in terms of UN Security Council resolutions, Israel seems to get the majority of the criticism when it's the only democracy in the Middle East, etc. Your government is getting a lot of the same. Animosity from France, which has been ongoing towards your country, which Israel has at times experienced as well. And there are many other similarities. So your solidarity with Israel and the Jewish people is important, given that you have a unique understanding of the kind of security concerns that Israel has. I mean, the kind of criticism that you're getting about Eastern Congo, and I still want to address that, has a lot to do with the fact that the FDLR, a terrorist group comprised of former genocidaires, are on your border, and you feel the need to fight them. There was a grenade thrown in a public space just before I arrived in Kigali that killed a few innocent civilians. And Israel also had a buffer zone in southern Lebanon until a few years ago because of terrorist organizations like Hezbollah that kill innocent Israelis. In light of that, since you're opening an embassy in Israel, and that was announced through your foreign minister at an event that we hosted, and I thank Louise also for her friendship to Israel, is there no possibility of the country of Rwanda having this unique understanding of Israel's security situation and vice versa? And you were one of the only heads of state to really be invited, along with President Clinton, to President Perez's 90th birthday party. You sat right there next to President Perez, President Clinton, Barbra Streisand, famous Jewish singer. Is there no possibility that you might consider opening your embassy specifically in Jerusalem to show solidarity with the Jewish state, given how maligned it can be and given how you yourself understand? Given, Mr. President, that you yourself must be astonished at the kind of attacks lodged against you when the world was so silent while your people died and you rescued them. And you understand us in a way that only you can, and we understand you in a way that only we can, and that would be a courageous step to have your embassy, which is about to be opened, in the Israeli eternal capital of Jerusalem, as opposed to Tel Aviv, which is a beautiful, your ambassador will have great times at the beach, But is that a possibility, Mr. President?
I think there is no question about the similarities of histories of our two peoples, with a lot of things happening differently or at different times and different places. But the feel and the feelings we have for the situation, and I guess the other way around, is not again in question. And for us, we feel very strong about relating to the Jewish people and to Israel, and we want to achieve that, and we have already had it moving quite well. In terms of relationship, we want to strengthen that.
The only thing I've ever disagreed with you on, and you have inspired so much of what I've done in my life, particularly my belief that the true response to the question of where is God when people suffer is that we don't want to know where he is. We have a right to challenge God and be angry at God and demand accountability, strange as it may sound, even from God. That the word Israel means he who wrestles with God, he who struggles with God. You have given humanity a voice in the face of God's omnipresence. We are not just cosmic chaff who are worthless and valueless, and God is always right, and we're always sinful, and we deserve to get smashed and killed because of our sins. I reject that. I think humanity is good by and large. But because of that, and you've given us that voice, that's a singular achievement that harkens back to Moses and Abraham, who did the same, speaking back to God. But yet, you believe we have no right to hate evil. And that's something you and I discussed. You said to me, Shmuley, we can't hate evil because if we do, we will internalize it. And then it'll become part of our constitution and our makeup. But Rebbe Eliezer, what am I supposed to feel towards genocide dares in Rwanda? The woman who I met when I was in Kigali, Mr. President, recently, whose husband was shot in the head in her house, and whose 2 children, they were babies, had their heads cracked against a wall in front of her face and then gang raped her by 20 men. And she said to me that she had not allowed a man to touch her in 18 years because she cannot believe that men are gentle. What am I supposed to feel towards men like that if not hatred? How could I be neutral? Miriam Adelson's entire family was wiped out. So many families, her mother's family, wiped out. What am I supposed to feel towards the SS? Towards the Nazis, towards the people who murdered your family? You know, the most powerful line I think I've ever read in world literature is the line that is now at the entrance of the U.S. Holocaust Museum. And it comes from your book, Night. That when you saw that child who was, I think, smuggling food in just to feed, I think, his father, and he was hung by his neck, you said that you saw God hanging from that tree. What a line, God Almighty. Why should I not hate people who could do that? How will I fight them if I don't hate them? Isn't there a place for hatred of evil?
Why not? If that's what makes you who you are, okay, I'm not fighting hatred. I simply don't believe in it. I believe there are other ways. Hatred is too easy almost. What do you do with it? Okay, you hate, and then what? I wish I could. But I was, let's say, inside those places. Did I hate the SS? I could never look at them. They were not allowed to look at an SS. How can I hate somebody whom I don't see? Second, it's really, it would limit the depth of the experience. Because once you hate, then the chapter is closed. The chapter is not closed. Some of us who were there, for us it lives to this day. In our sleep, in our dreams, and in our commitments. It's here. Without hate. Anger, absolutely. I believe in anger. Creative anger. A good anger. But hatred has a dynamic. Once somebody starts hating, hatred doesn't stop. It spreads. It goes from A to B to C, it goes. It's not a static thing. And therefore I'm not worried. If somebody says, nevertheless, I hate, I'm not even trying to convince, because who am I? I feel it's not my life, it's not my way of dealing with history or with my experiences. No. Once you say hatred is not the answer, then you ask, then what is the answer? And there, I say, okay, then now let's go and study.
The mere fact that the Bible could even equate human life with the divinity emphasizes the infinite value that the Jewish people place on the worth of every individual. Leviticus continues this thought with the famous commandment, "You shall not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor," imploring us never, never to allow innocent bystanders and innocents in general to be slaughtered. We look forward to hosting more events speaking about Jewish values in the culture, in the media, and especially amongst the hundreds of young people who are gathered here tonight from universities around the New York metropolitan area. I thank you all for attending, and I wish you every success. And now we have two gentlemen who are both in their 9th decade. I'm not sure either of them will admit it, but they are. And their birthday is, give or take, around now. So I'd like us, with Shmuly's help, to celebrate the birthday of Sheldon Adelson and Elie Wiesel. Thank you. What we have here is a Kiddush cup for Sheldon, and we know he imbibes on occasion, so it's very appropriate. And even more to the point is this big chumash. Now, chumash he doesn't imbibe in as much as he does Kiddush cups. So our hope is, I hope is that this heavy book will inspire Sheldon to read it on occasion. Happy birthday, Sheldon.
Happy birthday! Because Professor Wiesel is a great light to the world, we got him a truly avant-garde and modern, that is a menorah, whether it looks like it or not, Professor Wiesel.